Think chocolate cake without eggs or milk, apple pie with no apples, and soups that stretched a few humble ingredients into real strength. These were foods of hardship, yet many behaved like hidden superfoods. Let's step into the kitchens that did more with less and see why these recipes still matter. We begin with a dessert that feels like pure kitchen magic, a chocolate cake that rose tall without butter, eggs, or milk. During the 1940s, when ration books stripped pantries bare, this so-called wacky cake became a staple of American homes. It wasn't born in bakeries, but in ordinary kitchens and newspaper recipe columns. The trick was simple science. Baking soda fizzing with vinegar created lift. Vegetable oil stood in for butter, and cocoa brought the flavor. The method itself was memorable. Dry ingredients stirred right in the pan, 3 little wells for vinegar, oil, and vanilla, then water poured across like sudden rain. Minutes later, a soft, dark cake emerged, impossibly rich for its humble ingredients. The recipe survived because it delivered comfort when comfort was scarce. Families didn't just bake a cake, they baked a small victory, proof that flavor could still thrive in hard times. Wacky Cake brought sweetness to lean years, but nourishment was sometimes found in the most unexpected place, growing wild right outside the back door. Out of all the dishes born from the Depression, few capture the spirit of survival like dandelion salad. Families with empty cupboards stepped outside and saw food growing in plain sight, turning weeds into dinner. Dandelion greens were far from ordinary. Packed with vitamins A, C, and K, plus iron and calcium, they offered more nutrition than many store-bought vegetables. The trick was knowing when to harvest. Young leaves, picked early, had a tender bite that vinegar or lemon could soften into something crisp and refreshing. When cheese or oil were available, they balanced the bitterness with richness. This wasn't just thrift, it was transformation. Clara Canacciari, who later shared Depression recipes on YouTube, remembered her family calling them free and good for you, a gift from the yard itself when money couldn't buy much. Today, chefs use dandelions again in salads, pestos, and sautés, proof that was once a poor man's food has become a culinary curiosity. From wild weeds on the table, we move indoors to the skillet, where a golden loaf became a cornerstone of Depression-era kitchens. That golden loaf was more than just food. It was a tradition baked into cast iron skillets and passed down from one kitchen to the next. Long before boxed mixes filled grocery store shelves, families relied on a recipe so basic it could be made almost anywhere. With just cornmeal, water, and salt, people could create a loaf that was warm, filling, and ready in minutes. When it came to the table, cornbread offered more than nourishment. The crust baked to a golden brown, crisp at the edges, while the inside stayed soft and fragrant. Some broke it apart into bowls and poured milk over it, turning it into a simple but comforting meal. Others added honey or butter when they were lucky enough to have it, giving a sweet lift to its hearty flavor. Cornbread worked because it was easy to make and always came through. Its story runs deep. Native Americans were the first to grind maize into meal and bake it on hot stones, and over time it became a cornerstone of American food culture. By the Depression, it was more than a side dish, it was a reliable way to stretch a meal further. If cornbread was the dependable side, Hoover stew was the main act, a one-pot meal that could stretch scraps far enough to feed a whole family. Born in the leanest years of the Depression, it mixed whatever was on hand into something hot, filling, and shared. The base was simple: cooked macaroni, canned tomatoes, corn, and slices of hot dog simmered together. By themselves, these ingredients seemed unremarkable, but together, they transformed into a savory stew that warmed stomachs when it mattered most. Families quickly discovered its great strength was adaptability. One household might stir in beans, another tossed in peppers, onions, or broth if they had it. Every pot was different, shaped by whatever scraps the pantry could surrender. What made Hoover stew endure was not taste alone, but its sense of plenty. A bubbling pot signaled that no one at the table would leave hungry, even in hard times. It was Depression-era ingenuity at its most practical, a dish that proved scraps could become supper. Hoover stew turned scraps into supper, but the next creation pulled off an even stranger trick, serving up a classic American dessert without the very fruit it was named for. Scarcity sparked some of the cleverest tricks in Depression kitchens, and few were as surprising as mock apple pie. The name admitted the truth. There were no apples inside. Instead, soda crackers stood in as the fruit, softened with sugar, cinnamon, lemon, and cream of tartar until they looked, smelled, and even tasted like the real thing. Slice into it, and you'd find golden crust and warm, layered filling that convinced more than a few skeptics. The origins trace back to the 1800s, when families who had run out of apples in winter improvised with bread or crackers to keep pies on the table. By the 1930s, Ritz crackers became the star, their buttery flavor making the illusion nearly perfect. Nabisco even printed the recipe on Ritz boxes, turning a kitchen trick into a nationwide phenomenon. Mock apple pie wasn't just substitution, it was sleight of hand, giving families the joy of America's favorite dessert when fruit was out of reach. It was less about fooling the taste buds than lifting spirits, proof that imagination could turn scarcity into celebration. If crackers could pass for apples, the next trick proved that even sharp vinegar could be coaxed into tasting like fruit. Vinegar in a pie sounds like a mistake, yet during the Depression it became a clever way to create a dessert that tasted bright and fruity without any fresh fruit at all. Cooks poured sharp vinegar into a simple mix of sugar, butter, and vanilla, and the result was astonishing: a smooth, custard-like filling that echoed the flavor of lemon. The secret was balance. Vinegar brought tang, sugar softened it into sweetness, and butter rounded everything into comfort. Baked inside a golden crust, the pie set into a silky layer with the glossy top you'd expect from a lemon pie, even though no citrus was anywhere in sight. For families struggling to make ends meet, vinegar pie was more than dessert. It was a small triumph of creativity, a pantry staple transformed into something that felt fresh and indulgent, reminding people that flavor and comfort didn't have to disappear when money did. After vinegar's disguise, the next dish wasn't sleight of hand at all, but a daring combination that made taste buds raise an eyebrow. What happens when two foods that seem to have no business together end up on the same plate? The answer is one of the strangest recipes promoted in Depression kitchens: peanut butter stuffed onions. The idea wasn't culinary flair, it was practicality. Onions were cheap, sturdy, and packed with vitamins. Peanut butter brought fat, protein, and calories, enough to stretch a meal. Baked together, the onions softened into sweetness, while the peanut butter melted into a dense, nutty filling. The result was confusing to the palate, part savory, part sweet, part heavy, but it filled stomachs when little else could. The Bureau of Home Economics even spread the recipe through pamphlets and demonstrations, insisting it made sense nutritionally, if not gastronomically. Writers and thinkers also found an odd charm in the pairing. Ernest Hemingway, always drawn to strong flavors, enjoyed onions layered into a peanut butter sandwich, a combination he famously called the Mount Everest Special. Whether he meant it as a joke or genuine affection remains unclear, but the pairing became forever linked to his name. This was not a dish of delight, but of survival. A baked onion stuffed with peanut butter could be stretched into a meal with little more than breadcrumbs or salt. Strange though it seemed, it was another reminder that Depression cooking was about making do no matter the flavor. After such an unlikely pairing, we turned to a dish that spoke a universal language of comfort: a pot of beans simmered slowly into hearty soup. Steam rises from a pot, carrying the warm scent of beans, carrots, and slow-simmered ham. Few meals speak of comfort and survival as strongly as navy bean soup. Its roots stretch back to sailors at sea, where beans and salt pork sustained men for months. Later, during the Great Depression, it became a household staple, cheap, filling, and able to last for days. A single pot could feed a family, offering both nourishment and a sense of security. The beans held their shape even after long hours of simmering, while onions, carrots, and celery softened into the broth, turning it rich and golden. A handful of ham bones or scraps deepened the flavor, while spices like bay leaf or cloves added warmth without cost. The cooks even mashed part of the beans into the broth, thickening it into a heartier stew. In this recipe, beans are powerful little packages full of protein, fiber, and minerals that strengthen the body. Combined with ham or broth, they created a meal that was not only affordable, but also sustaining. Add cornbread or biscuits on the side, and you have a dinner worth gathering around. Navy bean soup endures because it adapts to whatever you have. Families emptied fridges of vegetables, tossed in leftover meats, or kept it meatless, and it always delivered comfort. And if you're curious for more, we've covered other soups throughout history in our episode 10 Forgotten Foods That Outsmarted Famine, Disease, and Time. Once the soup bowls were cleared, another Depression staple arrived, stacked and sliced into a loaf built on thrift and tradition. Golden light falls across a kitchen table, and at its center rests a steaming loaf, sliced to reveal tender meat wrapped around a glowing boiled egg. This was Meatloaf, the quiet hero of countless American kitchens during hard times. Though versions of Meatloaf had existed for centuries, it found its enduring American identity during the Depression. Families needed meals that stretched small amounts of meat into something that could feed everyone, and ground beef provided the solution. Mixed with oats, onions, eggs, or breadcrumbs, a single pound of meat could transform into a hearty loaf large enough to fill plates and bellies alike. The arrival of bottled ketchup gave Meatloaf its trademark crown. Spread across the top before baking, it caramelized into a tangy sweet glaze that sealed in juices and gave the loaf its glossy finish. That bright red topping became the line between plain supper and true comfort food, a detail families cherished when luxuries were scarce. Meatloaf was endlessly adaptable. Some cooks stirred in condensed soups, leftover vegetables, or crushed crackers. Others shaped hard-boiled eggs into the center for surprise and substance, making each slice feel more like a celebration than a compromise. Every loaf was a snapshot of what the pantry offered that week, a dish built on thrift but carrying real heart. What made Meatloaf endure was its reliability. It turned scraps into something whole, filled tables with warmth, and stretched the meal just a little further than anyone thought possible. From the steady comfort of meatloaf, we move to the sizzle of potatoes in a hot pan, fried golden to become one of the most versatile Depression-era favorites. In the lean kitchens of the Depression, nothing went to waste, not even mashed potatoes from the night before. Add a spoonful of flour, a single egg, and a pinch of salt, and leftovers could be reborn as potato pancakes, sizzling golden in a skillet. Crisp on the outside, tender within, they were cheap, filling, and perfect for stretching hard days into warm suppers. The potato itself had already traveled a long, uncertain road. First carried from the Americas to Europe, it was scorned as food for livestock or prisoners until scarcity forced people to embrace it. By the 1930s, it was a cornerstone of survival, a humble tuber that could be fried, boiled, baked, or, in this case, transformed into crisp patties that comforted body and spirit alike. Every culture seemed to claim a version. In Jewish kitchens, they were latkes, fried with onion and served at Hanukkah. In Germany, they were Kartoffelpuffer, paired with applesauce. Across Czech villages, Bramborak was seasoned with garlic and marjoram. During the Depression, American families joined that long tradition, proving that the potato's gift was its adaptability. Grate in a little onion and squeeze the mixture dry in a towel, which gives the edges a lacy, extra crisp finish. After the skillet cooled, the next bite split opinion across kitchen tables, a simple sandwich that paired pantry staples in a way few expected. It sounds odd, but this unlikely duo delivers a shock of flavor you won't forget. Smooth, nutty peanut butter clings to the bread, rich and filling, while sliced pickles bring sharp vinegar that cuts through every bite. The clash of creamy and sour created a rhythm on the tongue that surprised nearly everyone who tried it. Peanut butter had already carved out a place in American kitchens by the Depression. First promoted by John Harvey Kellogg in the 1890s, it gained new life in 1921 when Joseph Rosenfield discovered how to make it shelf-stable. That breakthrough meant jars could sit on store shelves for months, sold cheaply across the country. Pickles offered the same advantage, brined and bottled to last through winter without spoiling. Put together between slices of bread, the pairing became an affordable, energizing lunch. The sandwich worked because it married two strengths: the fat and protein of peanuts with the sharp kick of vinegar. It was quick, portable, and sustaining enough for workers and children alike. Newspapers even noted it on lunch counter menus, proof that this quirky creation reached far beyond home kitchens. Unusual as it seemed, the peanut butter and pickle sandwich captured the spirit of Depression cooking, transforming simple pantry staples into something memorable. After that daring sandwich, the final dish pushed thrift to its limit, creating a pie out of little more than water. A pie born from nothing more than water and hope, yet it still came out golden from the oven. That's the water pie, a dessert that seemed impossible but filled kitchens with sweetness when ingredients were scarce. At its heart, water pie is astonishingly simple: a pie crust cradling a filling of plain water, flour, sugar, a splash of vanilla, and butter into soft parts. Those few pieces, barely enough to call a recipe, melted together into a shimmering custard-like center. When baked, the texture was silky and slightly gelatinous, close to chess pie but far less heavy. The flavor was gentle, sweet, buttery, and steady enough to remind people of better times. It was never about extravagance. It was about turning almost nothing into something worth sharing. Part of what made water pie shine was its adaptability. Families could swap vanilla for almond, lemon, or even coconut extract, each twist turning it into a new creation. Some adventurous cooks drizzled apple cider vinegar into the mix, bringing out a flavor faintly like apple pie. Others discovered that Sprite could replace the water, lifting the sweetness with bubbles and zest. In every version, the pie stayed affordable, resourceful, and comforting. This was the last of the Depression-era dishes on our table, and perhaps the most astonishing. A dessert that began with almost nothing still managed to leave behind a taste of comfort and a reminder of how creativity could sweeten even the hardest times. Even in the hardest years of the Great Depression, families found ways to put food on the table. What seemed like poor food often turned out to be nourishing, inventive, and powerful enough to outlast the moment that created it. These recipes remind us that cooking has never just been about ingredients, but about imagination and survival. Which of these Depression-era dishes would you be most curious to try? Make sure to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who thinks great recipes always need a long list of ingredients. This is Stellar Eureka, signing off.